For 2019 will be awarded to Faisha Hassan for her non-violent efforts for equal access to higher education and her leading role in the movement #FeesMustFall in South Africa. It was the biggest mass movement of the people since the end of apartheid. The movement united students across the country, really putting a common cause and making students and education an issue to be put on the national agenda. The Students' Peace Prize is awarded every 2 years to student organizations working to promote peace, human rights and democracy around the world. And a very good evening to you and congratulations for this award. Firstly, I have to ask the question, of course, as I say, this was the largest mass movement of the people really since the end of apartheid. And obviously you've been one of the faces that's been identified, hence this award.
So for me, I think FeesMustFall, like you said, has been incredible in terms of seeing the mobilization of young people post-1994. But it's more than that. I think it's about seeing young people take up a cause and say, well, actually, this is something we're going to see through to the very end. And really the issue of FeesMustFall is more than just free education. I think we're seeing the awakening, I think, again, of young people taking issues not just to the front, but saying we're going to be a fundamental part of South African society.
There was a sense, I mean, you look at these visuals, there was a sense certainly in the beginning that this was a movement that had united students across campuses, across color and racial lines, and then at some point got, you could say, hijacked by different interests, both within the state and obviously within the fractured student movement, such as it became a little later on. Has it been able to sustain its original goals?
I think we need to look at FeesMustFall in a context, right? I think it was a very organic student movement. It's something that took a life of its own. And I also think we need to acknowledge that there were two different elements. I think the 2015 element of FeesMustFall was fundamentally different to 2016. Even the reaction of the police, of the state, and of many entities, I think you can see the difference also in how students had to react as well. But it's actually something where we need to see it for its bigger purpose and its bigger question. In any sort of mass movement, in any social movement, there's always going to be an attempt, I think, to hijack, particularly when you have so many young people in a space, particularly when you're so mass mobilized like this. But it shouldn't take away from not just the cause, but from what we were actually able to do. I mean, the former president last year announced the rolling out of free education to the poor and the working class. And as much as we're still making sure that gets implemented, that's a huge victory. We're still in a space where FeesMustFall changed the face of higher education. Before 2015 to now, it's quite different.
You've spoken about the trauma of that time. Once again, looking at these visuals, you've mentioned just a moment ago the reaction of the police. And you're saying that many of the activists, many of the students who are involved are still living with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Exactly. The PTSD from the police brutality and basically what we faced is something that not just myself, but many students are still going through now. And I think we're only starting to see it because we're starting to become more into a normal society. I think you're not able to really realize the impact of a FeesMustFall until you're back into a normal setting. We've seen so many students take their lives. We've seen so many students not just being unable to perform academically. Many universities will tell you their psychologists and their support of counseling has also had to increase because there's a much bigger thing that happened here. It wasn't that students were protesting for fun. It wasn't that we were out on the streets because it was fun or nice for us. I think it was more than that. It was about having to put our bodies on the line, our futures on the line, and ultimately make peace with the fact that we may not have a future as a young person. But at the end of the day, what's more important is what we're leaving for generations to come.
There is also, though, the argument that the politicians, being what they are, will find mass movements like this and hijack them for their own political considerations. You mentioned the announcement by the former president at the end of last year. There's still no clarity really about the practical steps of how all of that's going to be implemented, other than, you know, sort of almost cannibalizing, you might say, the FeesMustFall cause.
It's an interesting one for us because a lot of people think that because we're no longer on the streets that FeesMustFall has ended. And in actual fact, FeesMustFall is taking on a very different view and a very different idea, and that's one of policy, right? That's one of more bureaucratic elements in which we're saying, yes, there's been this announcement, but like you said, how are we actually implementing it? How are we going to ensure that it
there's no
trickles down to
clarity
the
even where the
bottom?
money is going to really come from. I mean,
Exactly.
what was being said in 2015 and 2016 is perhaps more nuanced now from the state, but the details are still the same, really.
Exactly, and you'll know that the NSFAS board has been put under administration. There have to have been huge sort of interventions that were put in, because essentially NSFAS was meant to outroll this free education and didn't have the capabilities to do so. So a lot of the work that we're actually doing now is behind the scenes, is with government, it's with NSFAS, and it's also with university management across the country to say that, are we ensuring that students are actually getting what was announced? And that's why I think that a lot of people like fees must fall over because this, announcement came. And my answer is very simple. It's not over. It's just taking on a different form to ensure that free education is actually implemented.
It was a mass movement. Why you?
I don't think it's just me. The Student Peace Prize, and immediately when we were informed about it, I made very clear that it's for the movement. It's for every single young person who put their bodies on the line, their futures on the line, their degrees on the line, in the name of free education. So I don't feel like it's for Fasiha. I see it as a much bigger purpose, something that belongs to so many young people in the country. And now the question becomes, well, how do we ensure that it's not just this prize? How do we ensure it becomes something more than that? And we're looking at starting some projects around sustainability, around capacity building, maybe even exchange programs for students.
Of course, we also know that a number of students who were involved in the activities, some of them are still languishing in jail. So what does this prize mean in that context?
Exactly. Right now, there are students who I think who are still in prison. Not I think, I know that for sure. But there are students this week who are undergoing court processes. Lamini is actually one of those people who tomorrow will be appearing in court. And I think, one of the biggest things that we're going to be able to do and use the Student Peace Prize really ultimately to put forward is the issue of amnesty for students. You know that we are in discussions already with the Ministry of Justice around dropping of charges for many, many students. But we also need to, there's people who are in different stages of the court process and therefore require slightly different approaches. And I'm kind of hoping, and we're hoping that the traction from the Peace Prize can be used essentially to put more pressure on government to ensure the amnesty of so many other activists.
You've spoken also about how your own parents and your own background inspired this life of activism, this consciousness for social justice.
My parents were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. They were students during the 80s, and I grew up in a home where they were building a government, right? My father was very involved in local government, and it really conscientized me from a very young age, not really knowing that. But now that I'm in the adult world, I'm able to separate issues, and I'm able to see things for what they are. And I'm very lucky to be able to more often than not, be able to choose what's right and the social justice approach.
And talking about being in the adult world, you've now become part of the establishment. Does that mean you're, as part of the ANC's comms team, now fighting the establishment, fighting the system from within?
We need to look at what's actually happened. Before Fees Must Fall, we were ANC members. During Fees Must Fall, we were ANC members, and even after. I think the difference was that during the movement, we all had to take a tactical decision, even those belonging to the EFF, that we had to put aside our political affiliation. But there hasn't actually been an inconsistency if you look at it. And the second more important point,
but some people will challenge that and say, look, it was that very ANC government that was quite unresponsive, resorting to the kind of violence that we were seeing.
And my response is very similar to this as well. As young people, we've been fighting so hard to be taken seriously, not just within political parties, but within government. We've said we need a space at the table, we have to be involved in the decision making. Now when space is created and when there's opportunities, we also need to take responsibility as young people and say we're going to be a part of doing the hard work and building the country. So that's actually what this is about. It's about more than just, we spoke about sustainability. As an activist, how do I ensure my activism becomes more sustainable? How do we take it to the next step? Higher education is one thing, but how do we ensure that the work that we can do benefits the rest of society? Let's look at healthcare, let's look at infrastructure, let's look at safety and security, and this is one step in my opinion, in the right direction for that.
What next for the movement, as you and I have both discussed now, that a lot of the issues you wanted are still to be worked out? What next for this movement?
I think the biggest one is still amnesty. We're going to push very, very hard on that. No one must think that we've forgotten about amnesty for students. But of course, it's this bureaucratic thing behind closed doors. We're also going to ensure that, yes, 2018 was the first year of sort of free education. But we're going to ensure that every year it needs to become more efficient. We need to be putting more money into the system, and we need to ensure that more and more students are actually graduating and going into the workplace and into the economy to ultimately also benefit economic growth.
Final question to you would be, there's always a danger when a prize like this is awarded that a movement is turned really into a monument, and the sense of what it meant and what it can still achieve gets diluted, gets lost perhaps.
It is a difficult one. I think that when people start to acknowledge the work that gets done by a movement, we also think, okay, we're finished now. And that's why I have to keep emphasizing that the work is ongoing. And also around how we can use that. If there are opportunities in the international community to fund some elements of higher education, that's something we need to utilize. So I'm really looking at how we can make it something more than just this Peace Prize.
What did Mandela say? At the top of a hill, you find there are yet many more to climb. Very well done and congratulations. That was, of course, Fasiha Hassan, who is part of that Fees Must Fall movement, student activist there being awarded that International Peace Prize. Well, as we said a little earlier,